Before we dive into today's story, kindly share your location in the comments below, and remember to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. The afternoon brought a false sense of peace that enveloped the world in a gentle, alluring quietness. Ben relaxed on the sofa, absent-mindedly flipping through channels with a distant look on his face. However, beneath the surface, his mind was a whirlwind of concerns. Over the past few months, he had noticed subtle changes in Kathy's behavior. Changes that unsettled him like an itch he couldn't quite reach. Kathy began leaving for work early in the morning and returning late at night. She was constantly engrossed in her phone, her conversations filled with soft laughter and secretive smiles she didn't bother to hide. When Ben tried to dig deeper, she brushed off his inquiries with a nonchalant wave, attributing her odd schedule to work commitments or social events. But Ben wasn't fooled. Something was definitely amiss. Now, as he observed her packing for a trip she had been anxiously discussing for weeks, anxiety twisted in his stomach as he felt the thick calm in the house, filled with unspoken tension. From the bedroom, he could hear her shuffling through clothes, the sound of zippers and fabric amplifying his unease. His heart raced, and finally he gathered the courage to stand up from the couch and lean against the doorframe. With a trembling voice, he asked the question that had been consuming him for days. "Do you really need to go on this trip?" Each word he spoke carried the weight of his unspoken fears. Though he didn't want to appear paranoid, the uncertainty had become too heavy to bear. Kathy didn't look up from her suitcase as she methodically folded clothes, as if the task took precedence over their conversation. "We've already discussed this, Ben," she replied in an even tone, sounding almost rehearsed. "I have to go away for a while." "For a whole week?" He pressed, his voice tight with anxiety. "You've never taken a trip like this without." Kathy's declaration to Ben was firm and cutting, her words making it clear that she did not need his approval to spend time with her friends. His reaction was muted, swallowing his emotions to prevent further conflict. Ben stepped back, conceding to her independence while still expressing his concern for her safety. As Kathy continued to pack, attempting to diffuse the tension, Ben noticed something that filled him with dread. Among her belongings was a provocative police officer costume, a sight that sent a shiver down his spine, raising questions about her intentions for the night ahead. As they prepared for a night out, Ben confronted Kathy with strong emotions. "Why do you need to wear that?" he exclaimed in disbelief and anger. Kathy initially appeared flustered by his reaction but then smirked confidently. "It's just for fun," she dismissed, showing off the outfit to him. Ben felt a surge of heat and clenched his fists at the provocative costume. His anger intensified as he warned her, "If you go out wearing that, you'll regret it." Kathy responded with a chilling laugh, dismissing his warning as she asserted her independence. "I can do whatever I want," she taunted, playfully waving a rubber band in front of him with a sinister grin as the smile spread across her face. She casually mentioned that her lover was already waiting for her outside. In that moment, Ben's world crumbled. All his insecurities and suspicions collapsed, weighing heavily on him like a house of cards. His hands shook with rage, not fear, as he quietly left the room, his heart thumping like a drum. He stormed down the stairs and flung open the front door, the loud bang reverberating through the air. There stood Kathy's lover, leaning against a car with a cigarette hanging from his lips, seemingly carefree. "Hey," Ben growled, his voice filled with fury as he crossed the lawn towards him. Startled, the man barely had time to react before Ben grabbed him by the collar, pulling him close and causing the cigarette to fall from his mouth. "What's happening?" The man stammered, his voice trembling, struggling against Ben's unyielding grip. The man pleaded in vain, his words falling on deaf ears. With determined strength, Ben forcefully ushered the intruder into the house, the door closing with a resounding thud behind them. In a swift, merciless action, Ben hurled the man onto the living room floor, igniting a chaotic scene that drew Kathy downstairs in disbelief and horror. "Stop it, Ben. What in God's name are you doing?" she cried out, her voice filled with desperation and fear. Blinded by a cloud of fury and anguish, Ben was consumed by a fierce determination not to lose her to this intruder. Struggling with internal turmoil, Ben reached a breaking point where rage surged through him like a bolt of lightning. Unyielding and fierce, he pinned the man down amidst a cacophony of escalating violence. Each strike carried the weight of pent-up emotions, a storm of resentment and betrayal that had been brewing for too long. Gasping for breath, the man beneath Ben fought to defend himself, but Ben showed no signs of relentingness like a relentless storm. Kathy's frantic screams filled the air as she hurried to pull Ben away from her lover. Panicked and pleading, she begged him to stop, clawing at his shoulders. "Stop, Ben, please stop," she cried out in desperation. Despite her pleas, Ben, his eyes blazing with fury, pushed her aside with a growl. "Do you really think you can come into my house, sleep with my wife, and just walk away?" He snarled, his voice filled with venom. The man, struggling to speak, gasped out, "Please, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Ignoring his words, Ben's roar echoed through the room as his fist connected with the man's jaw, sending him crashing to the floor. Kathy's screams intensified, a mix of panic and despair as she begged Ben to stop before he went too far, breathing heavily. He surveyed the gruesome scene before him, his anger still raging, yet finding no solace in the sight. Revenge had not brought him the satisfaction he had anticipated. It was but a pale reflection of the retribution he had envisioned, insufficient for the depths of their transgressions. His gaze landed on Kathy, her demeanor cold and unwelcoming, devoid of any warmth or compassion. "Kathy," he growled menacingly, his voice laced with threat, causing a shiver to run down her spine. Feeling a surge of fear, Kathy instinctively recoiled, her eyes betraying her efforts to de-escalate the tension. "Please, let's talk this out," she implored, her voice edged with desperation. In response, a cruel and barren smile twisted on Ben's lips, void of any semblance of compassion. "Regret?" He scoffed coldly. "I won't regret this, not for a moment." Seizing her wrist abruptly, he pulled her towards the bedroom, where her open suitcase lay on the bed. Without a word, he retrieved a provocative police uniform from within place marks and thrust it into her trembling hands. He ordered, his voice as cold as ice. She stared at him, disbelieving, her voice shaking as she protested. "Have you lost your mind?" Ben's grip on her wrist tightened, sending a surge of pain through her. His eyes darkened with an ominous intensity. "Put it on, or I fear, Kathy, you will regret this." Tears streamed down Kathy's face as the grim reality of the situation settled in. There was no escape from this nightmare. She had never seen Ben like this before, never imagined he could be so cruel. With shaking hands, she began to unbutton her blouse, her vision blurred by tears, her every movement heavy with fear. Her heart pounded in her chest with terror and regret. She struggled to put on the costume, each action more difficult than the last. Finally, she fastened the belt, adjusted the hat, and turned to face him, her voice barely a whisper. "Ben, please listen to me." But his expression was unreadable, cold, and detached as he watched her. When Kathy was finally ready, he motioned towards the living room. "Go sit with your lover. Wait for the police," Kathy gasped, her eyes wide with horror. "The police? What are you talking about?" Ben didn't explain. He just walked to the phone, dialed emergency services, and stared at her with eerie composure. "Yes, I'd like to report a disturbance at my home. My wife and her lover are here. I think you'll want to see this." After he hung up, a heavy silence settled between them. Kathy's eyes showed desperation as she begged, "Don't do this, Ben, please. We can fix this. Just don't." But Ben had reached his breaking point. He had enough of the lies, emotional pain, and suffocating betrayal. Brushing past Kathy and the crumpled figure on the floor, his heart raced with a blend of anger and relief. He grabbed the suitcase he had packed earlier, fully aware that this moment had been inevitable. Pausing at the threshold, he turned slightly, his voice chilling. "Everything, Kathy. Every last bit of it. The money, the house, the inheritance. I'm taking it all." The room was filled with Kathy's agonized sobs as she crumbled to the floor, hands covering her face in despair. She had always believed she had control, that her charm could manipulate Ben, that he would always pardon her mistakes. But reality hit her hard in that moment. She had lost it all, with no path to return. Stepping outside, Ben could hear the distant sirens wailing, a fitting soundtrack to his newfound freedom. He didn't look back as he got into his car, the engine roaring as he drove off into the night. Darkness enveloped him, the road ahead uncertain and never-ending. Yet for the first time in months, Ben felt a chilling sense of satisfaction. He had taken back his power. In that instant, he was certain that he had orchestrated a reckoning that Kathy and her lover would never be able to erase from their memories, clad in that ludicrous attire, attempting to justify herself to the authorities. A faint smirk formed at the edges of his lips. This was more than just seeking payback. It was about engraving this evening deep into her memory, a stark symbol of her disloyalty. With the wail of sirens receding, Ben pressed down harder on the gas pedal, leaving everything and everyone in his wake. Without a set destination in mind, he surprisingly found that he didn't need one. What truly mattered was the liberating feeling of freedom that surrounded him. Breaking away from the tangled web of lies, shedding the weight of betrayal, and cutting ties with the future he once envisioned as his own held utmost importance. Racing through the night, a chilling sense of satisfaction took hold of him, a potent reminder that he had reclaimed his life and vowed never to allow anyone to seize it from him again. Only upon reaching the airport did he finally ease off the speed, shutting off the engine and stepping out into the expansive parking lot. For a moment, Ben stood motionless with purposeful strides. Ben's footsteps reverberated through the near-empty space, breaking the eerie silence that enveloped the airport. Despite the pulsating energy filling the bustling terminals, a stark contrast to the turmoil he had just left behind, Ben had no inclination to dwell in the shadows of his past. Focused on his plan, he was resolute in seeing it through flawlessly. Memories of the tumultuous last hour played out in his mind as he approached the ticket counter. Kathy's tear-streaked face, the muffled cries from her lover, and the meticulous packing of his suitcase for the final time. Each scene fueled his determination, kindling a fire of resolve within him that could not be quenched. The surreal unfolding of events, tinged with clarity, reinforced his intuition that something was amiss long before encountering Kathy. Now his worst fears had manifested in a dreadful manner as he handed his passport to the attendant at the counter with unwavering determination. He calmly requested a one-way ticket. The agent hesitated for a moment, sensing the tension in the air, but ultimately remained silent. After a few clicks on her computer, she passed him the ticket without any change in expression. "Your flight leaves in 30 minutes, she informed him. Ben accepted the ticket, feeling a mix of weight and freedom in his hand. He had meticulously planned every step, tied up all loose ends, and now the moment he had long anticipated had finally come. Walking towards the security checkpoint, a sudden wave of tranquility enveloped him. His old life was fading away, yet the feeling was strangely comforting. Passing through security effortlessly, he made his way to the gate. The waiting area was nearly deserted, with only a handful of tired passengers scattered in the rows of plastic seats. Taking a seat by the window, Ben gazed at the distant runway as the city lights twinkled in the night as night began to fall. Instead of feeling burdened by the weight of his actions, he experienced a sense of thrilling closure. The final chapter of his life had come to a close, presenting him with the exciting prospect of new beginnings. Once the cornerstone of his existence, his marriage now lay in ruins due to betrayal. However, amidst the emotional turmoil, he had stumbled upon an unexpected opportunity for a fresh start. Boarding call announcements reverberated through the terminal, drawing Ben into line as his thoughts wandered back to the last moments at home. Departing without a backward glance, he left Kathy to face the aftermath of his choices. Though she believed she held the reins of her destiny, Ben recognized that all along, the power resided with him. Settling into his seat on the plane, Ben peered out the window, observing the city diminishing below him. The twinkling lights resembled distant stars, vanishing into the encroaching night. He was acutely aware of the impending consequences, unanswered questions, and looming investigations that awaited him. Chins. However, those concerns belonged to a different time, a different chapter of his life. In this moment, he was overcome with a thrilling sense of liberation as the plane ascended to greater heights. His thoughts started to untangle, drifting away from the shadows of his past. His future seemed like a clean slate, waiting for bold strokes in a place where his identity was unknown. This was precisely what he yearned for. The tumultuous events from his past were now in the rearview, and in front of him, there lay the anticipation of fresh starts. As the plane cruised towards the horizon, a feeling of release enveloped him. The island welcomed Ben with open arms, enveloping him in a warmth that seemed surreal, a stark contrast to the detached and calculated life he had left behind. The villa he had secured was not extravagant, but its location on a beach with soft white sands caressed by turquoise waves was perfect. It stood far away from the turmoil and deceit that had once clouded his days. Ben embarked on the intricate journey of rebuilding his life. Every morning he woke up to the soothing melody of the ocean, its sound acting as a soothing tonic for his soul, washing. Gone was the anger that once consumed him. Days unfolded in a familiar routine carefully crafted to keep his thoughts from dwelling on the shadows of his history. Each morning he immersed himself in the clear waters, feeling the distance grow between his present self and the person he used to be. The ocean served as his sanctuary, a place to unburden his soul. Though not entirely free of his past, he found solace in its embrace. Afternoons were for exploring the island, discovering hidden paths meandering through vibrant tropical forests. He encountered locals, whose warm hospitality enveloped him in a sense of belonging he had long missed. They didn't pry or prod, simply accepting him for who he was. Their genuine kindness and shared meals brought a peace that had eluded him for so long. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he would settle down sitting on the porch of his villa. Ben held a book in one hand and a glass of rum in the other. The local sunsets painted the sky in vibrant hues that melted into the horizon as the sun descended below the waves, creating a breathtaking view. Taking a moment to reflect, Ben embraced the beauty of the present and the potential for new beginnings. However, memories from his past lingered like a shadow, subtly present beneath the surface of his tranquil life. During peaceful moments, it almost seemed as if those dark days belonged to another person, a distant echo of a life he yearned to move beyond. Yet the past had a way of creeping back, hiding in the corners of his mind and striking when least expected. On quiet nights, when the world outside was silent except for the gentle waves caressing the shore, Ben would awaken to find himself lost in intense memories that stole his breath away. The tears on Kathy's face and her anguished cries vividly replayed in his mind. Overwhelming him with their intensity, he was haunted by the memories of his lover and the chilling satisfaction he had felt in seeing their suffering. This eerie sensation sent shivers down his spine, a feeling that was almost unbearable. Although the sharpness of his guilt had slightly faded over time, it lingered as a constant companion, stirring him awake, especially when he glimpsed couples strolling hand in hand on the beach, their laughter echoing in the quiet. These sounds served as a stark reminder of what he had lost, particularly what he had destroyed. Once he and Kathy had walked those same sandy paths, enveloped in love and joy, free from betrayal. Now those reminiscences pierced through him, leaving a persistent ache in his heart that refused to dissipate. Music had also become a merciless trigger, luring him back into the depths of a past he desperately wished to forget. Each melody resonated with a painful sense of nostalgia, evoking memories of the happiness he had let slip away. He found himself grappling with the ghosts of his choices played out in his mind, triggering memories of dancing with Kathy to a familiar song on the radio. The tender moments resurfaced vividly, her laughter breaking through the melody like sunlight through leaves, her head resting on his shoulder as they swayed together in pure joy. But as quickly as these memories appeared, a sharp, piercing pain replaced the warmth, pulling him back into the heavy grip of regret. Living on the island with its whispers of secrets from the waves and golden-hued sunsets felt like paradise. Yet it was also a constant reminder of his self-imposed exile, serving as both a refuge and a prison that bound him to his past. Ben couldn't linger in solitude forever, haunted by the ghosts of his past. The tranquility offered by the island was merely a temporary distraction, not the cure he desperately needed. He knew he had to find a way to break free from the shadows that held him captive, to conquer the darkness that lingered within, wrapped around him like a shadow. The loneliness had been his constant companion for a year. But now, after careful consideration, he found himself at a crossroads. It was time to make the journey back home. Although this decision was riddled with doubt, the idea of leaving the protective embrace of the island filled him with unease. Yet deep within, he recognized that it was imperative to face his demons, to confront the choices that had led him to this moment. Evading his past was no longer an option. To truly embark on a fresh start, he needed to come to terms with his history. Only then could he dream of attaining the peace he craved. As he packed his things, Ben cast one final glance at the villa, the serene beach, and the vast ocean that had shielded him. A mix of sorrow and hope lingered in the air, hinting at the challenges awaiting him and the chance for rebirth. While the island had granted him solace and the opportunity to mend, the time had come to venture into unfamiliar territory. Standing on the shore, uncertainty flooded his thoughts. One undeniable truth pulsed through his mind. He could no longer evade the shadows of his past. The time had finally arrived for Street to confront the ghosts that had tormented him for too long. The sensation of returning home was akin to entering a surreal dream. A mixture of nostalgia and detachment. The hustle and bustle of life enveloped him, with familiar sounds acting as a comforting melody. Yet everything seemed different, as though the world had moved forward without him. It was as if he had disappeared, leaving behind a trail of confusion and unresolved queries. Time had clouded the memories of those he once knew, engulfing them in new scandals and tales. Ben was now a changed man from the one who had escaped, with his former self seemingly buried on the island. To navigate this altered reality incognito, Ben assumed a new persona. In a secluded part of the city, he leased a humble apartment, using a false name and paying in cash to fade into obscurity. The life he once cherished had transformed into a distant memory, superseded by the shroud of anonymity now shielding him. Ben brought Ben back to the city that he had believed he had left behind forever. Maybe it was a desire to find closure, or perhaps an unspoken need to face the consequences of his past decisions. His journey commenced in the welcoming familiarity of his former neighborhood. As he passed by the house that once provided him solace, a wave of nostalgia washed over him. What was once lively and brimming with vitality now stood dilapidated, a mere shadow of its former self. The unkempt lawn, the weary shutters hanging askew, and the weather-beaten for sale sign swaying dejectedly in the wind all painted a poignant picture. Despite a twinge of regret piercing his heart at the sight, Ben quickly quelled those emotions. That chapter of his life was closed, and he understood that clinging to its remnants was fruitless. In the silent hours of the night, Ben found himself driving through the city, revisiting each milestone of his relationship with Kathy. Vivid memories flooded his mind as he passed by the cafe where they shared their first date, the park that had witnessed their lazy sunlit picnics, and the hotel. Their honeymoon had been a backdrop filled with a mix of emotions, from sweet and tender to bitter and haunting. However, the shadow of how it all fell apart loomed over every cherished moment. Finding himself at a small, unremarkable bar on the outskirts of the city, which he used to frequent in his youth, Ben was struck by a sense of familiarity. The dim lighting and quiet atmosphere, with only a handful of patrons enjoying their drinks, felt like an old friend ready to share forgotten stories. Settling onto a bar stool, Ben ordered a whiskey, its amber glow piercing through the darkness. As the warmth of the glass seeped into him, he drifted into a haze of memories that sent shivers down his spine. Each sip brought fleeting comfort, yet the ghosts of his past lingered. Lost in his thoughts, a sudden touch on his shoulder brought him back to reality. Turning around, he was met by Leo, a familiar face familiar to him. Leo's nostalgic warmth enveloped Ben as he from long ago stood before him, displaying a mix of disbelief and excitement in his eyes. "Ben, is it really you?" Leo's voice held such emotion that it felt like a tug on Ben's heartstrings. Managing a smile, Ben nodded. "It's me, Leo. Leo's face lit up as he pulled up a stool, his eyes betraying a hint of concern as they swept over Ben's features. "You look different." Ben chuckled with a dry tone, the laughter barely concealing the complexity of his emotions. "Life happened, I guess." As the two men delved into a comfortable routine, time seemed to vanish as they shared tales of their past adventures, each story bringing them closer together through shared laughter. Yet underneath the surface levity, Ben sensed unspoken inquiries lingering in the air, a silent acknowledgement of the years that had elapsed between them. These questions hovered like wisps of smoke from a fire, hinting at deeper issues. Where had he disappeared to? What had caused the fracture in his marriage? And why had he severed ties so abruptly? As the evening progressed, the atmosphere shifted from casual banter to a more somber tone, hinting at a deeper conversation that Leo seemed poised to initiate and leaned in, speaking in a hushed tone as if afraid of the shadows overhearing. "Ben, there's something you should know," he said softly. Ben's chest tightened with anxiety. "What do you mean?" he inquired, a feeling of unease creeping over him. Leo paused thoughtfully, his words deliberate and heavy. "It's Kathy. She's been struggling greatly since you disappeared. Everything fell apart for her. The police looked into it, but nothing came of it. She lost everything, her home, her job. Right now, she's living with her sister, trying to piece her life back together." Ben was struck deeply by Leo's revelation. A whirlwind of emotions, dread, guilt, and a troubling sense of satisfaction churned within him. While he had initially craved Kathy's pain and the impact of his absence, learning about her downfall made him reassess. This wasn't the distant revenge he had desired. The woman's once opulent life lay shattered beyond repair, a distant memory now. Leo tentatively broached the idea of reaching out to her. Considering their 42-year marriage, Ben stared at his glass, watching the amber liquid swirl, fearful of facing Kathy and the ruins they had both left behind. "I don't know, Leo. I'm not sure I can do it," Ben admitted uneasily. Understanding shone in Leo's eyes as silence settled between them. "It won't be easy, buddy. Maybe it's time for both of you to move forward," Leo suggested. Ben acknowledged Leo's wisdom with silence, knowing the challenging path to reconciliation lay ahead like a daunting, uncertain labyrinth. As he finished his drink, the weight of reality loomed heavy on him, confronting not just his past, but also the future as Ben approached Kathy's sister's house, grappling with the weight of an impending decision regarding the future he truly desired. He felt a mix of anxiety and determination. No longer able to evade the inevitable, he stood at the doorstep, seeking answers and closure to unravel his emotions. With a trembling hand, he knocked, the ticking of the clock magnifying the thumping of his heart as the door creaked open to reveal Kathy, bearing the weariness of time etched on her once vibrant face, casting shadows in a room where confidence once reigned. They stood facing each other in a long, tense moment, with unspoken truths hanging heavily in the suffocating silence. Kathy's voice eventually shattered the stillness, soft and unsure, as she said, "Hello," reluctantly. Ben replied with a husky voice, thick with unresolved emotions high. Sensing his inner turmoil, Kathy silently gestured for him to come in. The modest interior of the house was a stark contrast to the elegance of their past life together, yet it offered a sense of familiarity, like a comforting embrace. As they settled in the living room, taking seats at opposite ends of the sofa, the atmosphere filled with unspoken tension that clung to them like a heavy cloak. "I never thought I'd see you again," Kathy finally spoke, her voice trembling as she locked eyes with him. A mix of fear and hope flickering in her gaze. A candle flickered uncertainly in the darkness, revealing a vulnerability in her that Ben had never seen before. "I wasn't sure I would return," he confessed softly, barely audible. "But I needed to see you. I needed to understand why you made those choices." Kathy averted her eyes, her hands restless in her lap, betraying the inner turmoil she carried. "I don't have a good explanation, Ben," she admitted with emotion weighing down her voice. "I was selfish. I craved more than what we had, and I failed to appreciate our connection. I believed I was in control, but I was merely deceiving myself. I made grave errors, and I destroyed everything." As Ben let go of the anger that had plagued him, his heart filled with a profound sorrow. "I know I'm not faultless either, Kathy," he murmured gently. "I carry my own regrets. But your actions, they shattered me." Tears glistened in Kathy's eyes, which she swiftly wiped away with the back of her hand, struggling to maintain her composure. Kathy addressed Ben, both feeling the weight of their shared history lingering between them. As she whispered an apology, expressing remorse for the pain she had caused him, the unspoken words only added to the tension in the room. Their silence became thick with emotions, enveloping them in the echoes of their past relationship, a mixture of sweetness and bitterness. The room felt burdened by the memories of their love and betrayal, woven into a complex tapestry that had ultimately led to their unraveling. Breaking the heaviness of the moment, Kathy tentatively posed the question of what they should do next, hinting at the possibility of going their separate ways. Ben, exhausted and contemplative, sank further into the couch, acknowledging the complexity of their situation. He had originally sought closure, but the magnitude of their past actions and the destruction it had caused made him question if closure was truly attainable. Kathy, meeting his gaze with a mixture of understanding and empathy, awaited his response, knowing that their journey ahead was far from simple. "I understand your regret, Ben," she said quietly. "I don't expect your forgiveness. I just want you to know how deeply sorry I am." They lapsed into silence once more, the weight of their shared history no longer suffocating, but still tangible. For the first time in years, Ben sensed a small crack forming in the fortress of pain and anger that had enveloped him since that fateful day. Though fragile, this crack hinted at the possibility of something more. "I need time," he finally said, his voice steady yet vulnerable. "We may never be the same as before, but perhaps, just maybe, we can find a way to move forward." A small, bittersweet smile graced Kathy's lips, and a glimmer of hope pierced the sadness in her eyes. Tears welled in her gaze, reflecting the inner turmoil she harbored. "I'd like that, Ben," she murmured softly. "I really would." They lingered in that moment, both unwilling to bid a final farewell, knowing that their heartfelt conversation marked a pivotal step toward an uncertain future. Ben felt, for the first time since their world had collapsed, a flicker of hope sparkle within him. Perhaps with time they could each find some semblance of peace. In the days following their emotional confrontation, their journey toward healing began, marked by tentative steps forward. Ben and Kathy found themselves in a delicate situation where conversations reopened old wounds, and memories stirred emotions they had long tried to suppress. They weren't trying to restore the past. Instead, they were learning how to coexist with the scars that remained. At first, their communication was fraught with tension. The weight of their shared history loomed over every word, every fleeting glance. They danced around each other, unsure how to interact, afraid of saying too much or too little. Yet the desire for resolution bound them together, even amidst the discomfort. One afternoon, they sat on a weathered bench in a quiet park, the trees gently swaying in the breeze. It was their first walk in At Few, a much-needed break from the confines of Kathy's sister's home. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and nostalgia. Ben finally broke the silence, his voice a blend of determination and introspection. "Kathy, I'm not sure if I can ever truly forgive you. What happened is something I cannot simply erase from my memory," he expressed, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Kathy, with her gaze lowered, accepted his confession, tracing patterns on the ground with her eyes. "I understand, Ben," she responded softly. "I'm not seeking forgiveness. I just want you to see my efforts to make amends, even though I can't change what has happened." A somber silence enveloped them, both lost in their own deep reflections. Both knew that they needed to find a way forward, even if it meant going in separate directions. As they took tentative steps toward healing over the following weeks, Ben gradually realized that parting ways would be the best outcome for both of them. One quiet evening, sitting alone, he came to this realization. Shoulders burdened with the weight of his decisions, the inevitability of his choices loomed over him. The conversations, the moments of vulnerability, the flashes of understanding they had shared were meaningful. However, he now realized that their paths had diverged too significantly for them to continue walking them side by side. As Ben pondered the journey they had undertaken together, he acknowledged that both he and Kathy had evolved. They had grown, they had found healing, but the love that once bound them together had dissipated. In its place emerged a different kind of connection. Quieter, less all-encompassing, yet still significant. Ben couldn't deny that they had veered away from the individuals who once committed to an eternity together. Their past would always be a part of their story, but Ben comprehended that their destinies now unfolded in separate ways. One afternoon, he reached out to Kathy, proposing a meeting at the park where they had exchanged countless thoughts. Upon sitting face to face, Ben gazed at Kathy, his heart weighed down with sorrow yet steadfast in resolve. I believe he started, his voice with a sense of calmness yet deep sentiment. It's time for us to part ways, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence for our past and present selves. Kathy's expression softened as she absorbed these words, her heart heavy yet understanding. Though sadness lingered in her gaze, there was also an acknowledgement that this separation was the right decision for both of them. Intertwined in ways difficult to unravel, their choice to let go offered a chance for individual healing and personal growth. I don't want to say goodbye, Ben, Kathy murmured, her voice trembling with emotion, but I know it's what's needed for us. Recognizing that they could not return to what once was, Ben silently agreed, his words caught in his throat. I never wished for it to end this way, he confessed sorrowfully, but perhaps our paths were meant to diverge. We have evolved, and now we must embrace that change and journey in separate directions. Tearfully, Kathy gazed into his eyes, holding his hand briefly before eventually releasing him to a quiet embrace. It wasn't the passionate reunion they had once imagined, but it was a farewell that carried weight, an understanding that sometimes love meant letting go. I'll never forget you, Ben, Kathy said softly, her voice barely a whisper as she pulled away. You were my everything once. I'll always carry you with me, and you'll always carry a part of me, Ben replied, his voice breaking ever so slightly. I wish you the best, Kathy. I really do. They stood in silence for a moment, the world around them fading into the background. Neither of them spoke. But in that quiet, they both knew what needed to be done. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without pain, but it was the only way they could truly move forward. With a final, lingering look, they turned away from each other. Their paths, once so intricately entwined, now separated. Ben walked away with a heavy heart, but a newfound clarity. Kathy, though deeply saddened, felt a sense of peace slowly settling over her as they took their initial steps in varying paths. They held on to the wisdom gained, the love exchanged, and the realization that sometimes the most powerful gesture of love involves releasing. We invite you, dear audience, to kindly share your reflections in the comments section, and remember to show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing.